All right, today we are jumping into one of the wildest but 100% true stories from the history of fashion. It's a story about innovation, about public panic, and about a piece of clothing so shocking it literally caused a riot.
So let me start with a quick question for you. Think about Abraham Lincoln, the mascot Mr. Peanut, and even rich Uncle Pennybags from the Monopoly game. What is the one thing they all have in common?
Yep, it's this, the top hat. It's that iconic piece of headwear that connects them all. Now, we see it as classy, maybe a little old-fashioned, right? But definitely not dangerous. Thing is, that wasn't always the case.
To really get why, we need to go all the way back to London in 1797. And we need to meet the man at the center of this whole mess, an English hatmaker or haberdasher named John Hetherington.
So, Hetherington had come up with something completely new, something he was sure would turn heads. It was this tall, tube-like hat made of shiny, lustrous silk, and it had a big, stiff brim. You gotta remember, for people in 1797, this looked like something from another planet.
So, on January 16th, Hetherington figures, hey, it's showtime. He puts on his magnificent new hat and steps out onto the streets of London, one of the busiest places in the world, hoping to stir up some business. And, well, he definitely turned heads, just not in the way he'd hoped.
You see, what happened next wasn't a sudden rush of customers. It was, and I am not exaggerating here, a complete and total public meltdown. The sight of Hetherington's hat sent a normal day in London spiraling into absolute chaos.
There was actually a newspaper report about it at the time. It described how the unusual sight of this tall, shiny object was so jarring that women literally fainted on the street. Kids started screaming, dogs were barking, the whole city just erupted.
I mean, it was just pandemonium. And it wasn't just noise. A huge crowd swarmed around Hetherington. And in the crush, a young boy actually got knocked down and broke his arm. All of this because of a hat?
Things got so out of hand that the cops had to be called in. And they didn't just break up the crowd, they arrested John Hetherington and dragged him and his hat in front of the Lord Mayor for breaching the peace.
And what happened next was this bizarre legal showdown. On one side, you have Hetherington arguing, hey, I'm just exercising my right to wear a hat I designed. But the court, they weren't buying it. The judge declared that the hat's shiny, tall design was, and this is a direct quote, calculated to frighten timid people.
So, there you have it. Hetherington was found guilty of wearing a tall, shiny thing. But what do you think the penalty was? What's the fine for a fashion crime this serious?
The court ordered him to pay a bond of £500. 500. Now, for the time, that was a staggering amount of money. This was not a slap on the wrist. This was a major financial punishment for a piece of clothing.
And just to put that in perspective for you, £500 back then is the equivalent of more than £60,000 today. Can you imagine paying that much money for wearing a new hat? But here's the kicker. Despite this absolutely disastrous and incredibly expensive debut, the story of the top hat was far from over. In fact, its real journey was just getting started. So, let's look at how this scandalous public menace from 1797 somehow became a must-have fashion item. The very thing that was causing women to faint would soon become the ultimate symbol of being a sophisticated gentleman. Because, believe it or not, after the initial shock wore off, the design started to catch on. Slowly but surely, top hats became less scary and more fashionable. And by the 1800s, you couldn't be a respectable upper-class man without one. So John Hetherington, the guy fined for scaring people, he got the last laugh in the end.
And that pretty much wraps up this crazy story. But it leaves me with a question. It's honestly hard to imagine any piece of clothing causing this much of a panic today. But what do you think? Is there a modern fashion trend out there that's so bold, so completely new, that it could actually start a riot? Something to think about.